how in the world are they making this connection between the reformers and the Enlightenment? Because my guess is the average Christian like those are two completely different things. But then there's some scholars, and I've read a lot of them actually recently. Charles Taylor, I think, is one of those that might be, people might know him and some of the arguments that he makes, and he's developed this. He talks about the breakup of the hierarchy of the church, emphasis on personal virtue and study, back to the sources. Let's not worry about, or it's not just rely on the church authorities. And so he talks about this as like, is kind of being the entryway into humanism, the entryway into like self-thought, personal thought. You talked about this a little bit, religious plurality and internalization of religion, and so a bunch of things. So how do you approach this thesis that the reformers actually gave us the Enlightenment? They were the entryway into Enlightenment into personal thought.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing I would say is I have enormous respect for Charles Taylor. He's brilliant.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And, so much of what he's trying to put his finger on in terms of secularization, and I mean, we live in that world.
Totally.
And so I think he's trying to come to terms with it. At the same time, though, there's others. Radical orthodoxy, for example, is one illustration. There can be this tendency to think, well, okay, clearly, when you get to the late medieval period, there's a pretty radical break in metaphysics, down all the way down to soteriology and even ecclesiology. And I think that whether it's Taylor or radical orthodoxy, I think that we could say, okay, could they deal with the sources better and represent them better? Yes. But I do think at the very least, they are right to notice something's changed.
Yeah.
And it has a lot to do with the voluntarism and the nominalism that rises to the surface over against the intellectualism of past classics like Aquinas, for example.
Sure.
And their realism. Now, that being said, I think that's right enough. We can debate over how well do they understand and that sort of thing. But their instinct is right.
Yeah.
Clearly there is a radical break at this point. The question, though, where I take issue, the question then becomes, okay, well, that we do see those same tendencies after modernism.
Yep.
So how do we get there? What's the bridge? And that's where they look at the reformers and they say, there it is.
Yep.
It seems to match chronologically. More than that, and you could see how you could interpret reformers this way, right? Luther is talking about an alien righteousness, something outside of us. Whatever happened to participation in the likeness of God and God's real presence to create a real internal change in us? Aren't we just emphasizing now imputation as something external that is just transactional? Or what about the sacraments? Do they just completely go in a voluntarist and nominalist direction? So there's all kinds of questions at this point over the reformers. Should we interpret them that way? Are they to blame for the voluntarism and nominalism that seems to carry forward into modernism? The problem with that narrative, okay, is yes, it is very convenient. I won't deny that. And chronologically, I see how you get there. The problem is the reformers, though, are so more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
They're more complicated. They're just way more complicated than that. You take Calvin and the Lord's Supper. Calvin does have a strong emphasis on participation. And when he talks about the Lord's Supper, he's very critical of Zwingli. This is not a type of as Calvin will call it, this is not just some naked mere memorial. That's probably not fair to Zwingli, but that's another story.
Totally.
Um, but the point that Calvin's trying to make is, we believe in the Holy Spirit, and so Christ, there is the presence of Christ, is not a fiction. Rather, the Holy Spirit lifts us up into the heavenlies so that we participate and have communion with the risen and ascended Christ. Well, I mean, I'm just painting with a broad brush here, but that's just one example among many that shows actually that's probably not fair to the reformers then to say that they've cut this cord of participation. And so now you enter into this world with the Reformation, in which God is just making these, voluntarist decisions, and morality and virtue become almost relative. They're not based in something universal. Actually, there's been great books, by Todd Billings and I think it's Julie Canlis that have been written, saying, well, they, especially when you get to the Reformed classics, they do have an understanding of universals, and they do believe that they're even Neoplatonic in a sense. So all that to say, it's just not nuanced enough. I think the blame is elsewhere. Ultimately, it's not that the reformers don't have any tendencies in the wrong direction towards a nominalism or voluntarism. I don't think they're ultimately to blame. This is just this. I think further research needs to be done here. But I think rather than blaming, say, the Protestant scholastics, I think it might be better to look at the Socinians. It's just one example of, well, how do we get to an age in which doctrines that were previously orthodox, now these are questioned altogether, and we begin to enter into a heretical direction that is grounded in a philosophical deviation in the end.
Totally.